G'day all and welcome to the Build Me a Brewery podcast. My name is Chris Hayton and this is part 2 of the brewery licensing and government compliance segment. Today's episode I chat with Russell Steele from RSA Liquor Professionals. Now Russell, he has many years experience working both sides of the playing field with 9 years working as a state licensing regulator and 10 years working in and managing licensed premises in Queensland and the Northern Territory. In our chat, Russell outlines and explains in much detail all the different licensing types for producing and selling beer. He also talks about how he helps brewery owners navigate the confusing and highly regulated environment of liquor licensing, as well as discussing important considerations around different types of permits for brewery owners depending on what type of brewery they want to be, including thoughts around serving food and having live music at your venue. I'll leave you to it then. I hope you enjoy my chat with Russell Steele from RSA Liquor Professionals. Welcome, Russell, to the Build Me a Brewery podcast. Thanks for coming on, mate, and sharing your time.
Always happy to share a bit of advice with the craft beer industry.
And listen, we pretty much nearly conducted a full interview off air just then. So I know that already that you've got a ton of information to share with the audience. And like I was saying earlier, it's probably not the most sexiest subject on opening and operating a brewery, but it is probably one of, or if not the most crucial part of actually owning a brewery and getting open to serve liquor and alcohol to customers. Would you agree?
Pretty essential piece of the overall jigsaw puzzle. If you don't have a liquor license, you can't sell beer.
Yeah, and we're going to definitely be diving into all the different things that people need to be considering on the licensing and compliance side. And I guess just a bit of a disclaimer for the audience is because it is so different in each state and each local council, obviously we're going to broad stroke some of the information we share with the audience because, you know, I know that you're more focused on the Queensland licensing side. So that is going to be different to what happens in New South Wales and Victoria and other states. So, yeah, I think the audience will get a good idea or at least a foundation of what they need to be considering when it comes to the licensing aspect. But before we do get into all that, Russell, just to kick things off, if you wouldn't mind telling the audience a bit about yourself and your career background and how you came to be working in the industry you're in now.
Okay, so I when I left school, I started working in pubs and nightclubs and sort of did 10 years in that kind of industry. It became an industry that, I lived and breathed. And in the late 90s, I decided to get a government job and take a bit of a break from the late nights and that type of stuff. And I was lucky enough to land a job within liquor licensing Queensland in the government. I worked there for a decade. When I left, I was a principal investigator and had learned a hell of a lot of the rules around liquor licensing. Then about 11 years ago now, I hung a shingle up and set up my company, RSA Pro. Worked out well for me, Russell Steele and Associates, RSA. Nice little bit of branding, we thought, and that's just stuck. And look, when I was at liquor licensing, it was a bit of the dark side, working for the regulator, and I've come back from the dark side now and help our industry deal with an ever increasing range of government red tape. So that's what I do. I help small businesses. If you're really good at making beer, and you're at that point where you've done your time either working for someone else or just being a gypsy or a hobby craft brewer, and you're looking at jumping onto the craft beer train, if you're good at making beer, you might not be good at all of the red tape and all of the forms and all of that stuff. And whichever state you're in, identify what your strengths are and go and find someone who does this stuff for a living. There are consultants in each state and territory. We're the craft beer leader here in Queensland, and can help. And we've done most of the big guys' liquor licenses over the last, the really recognisable brands in the craft beer sector here in Queensland. We've done most of their licenses and can help you deal with the red tape. So you go and order your brewery and do those things that you need to do well, and let others do what they do well.
I know that you have a pretty detailed website explaining some of the services you offer and giving the audience a bit of a short introduction on what it is. If you're able to dive in a bit more detail about exactly the full suite of services you offer, locations you mainly operate in, and yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So every state and territory in Australia has their own Liquor Act, or in Queensland we've got a Liquor Act and a Wine Industry Act as well. I specialise in Queensland, so because it's a state-based act, I can do liquor licensing anywhere from Cairns to Coolangatta very easily and know all of the details. Everything is dealt with generally in the state capital in each state. So even if you're in a rural or regional area, you may be able to hire somebody who's based in Sydney or based in Melbourne who deals with head office of our liquor regulators generally, because that's where the decisions are made and where the rules are. So, wherever you are, look for an expert in your state is my advice.
Yeah, and we're going to also probably in our show notes link to some of those individuals or some of those companies per state if I'm able to track them all down. But I know that there's a counterpart here in New South Wales. So for the audience, I'll be referencing in the show notes as to who they are, so you can go and investigate yourselves. But I guess moving on to, the nitty gritty part of the purpose of the episode. So I guess the important considerations aspiring brewery owners or new breweries that are about to operate, or even those that are established that just want a bit more information and clarity on how it all works. If you're able to talk through some of the standard licensing requirements for a brewery to open and operate.
Okay. As most people who've started to look at the details and are considering making an application for a brewery license anywhere in Australia, you probably worked out we're a fairly over-governed country. We learn in grade 8 or in high school somewhere, that we've got 3 tiers of government: Commonwealth, state, and local. And think of it like a jigsaw puzzle. You have to get a license or approval from every one of those 3 tiers, and it can be really frustrating. But if I can break it down in a generic way, broad brushstroke stuff, it's not legal advice, but should help everyone have an understanding of the scope of things. The first one is the Commonwealth. So beer, spirits, wine, brandies, liqueurs, all of those things within Australia, they're called excisable goods, and you need an excise license. There are different types of excise licenses. The main relevant one here is a brewery license under the Commonwealth Excise Act. That's issued by the ATO. And the ATO's preference, in my experience, is that the owner and operator and brewer is the taxpayer, that company, the director of that company, the owners of that company, which most of these startups are small businesses. You're going to be the guy or girl who is brewing the beer, who's buying the equipment. The ATO will tax you. So they want to talk to you as a taxpayer, and they want to cut out the middleman. So they don't like consultants like me in this space, because we're not licensed tax agents, and we don't know all of the answers specific to your questions. So they want to talk to you. It's as simple as Googling ATO Excise License Australia, words like that. And there's a simple link. We'll probably get it put in the show notes, and you lodge that application yourself. That way, the ATO can contact you and say, what are you doing? You're putting a 10-hec system in. What brew house have you bought? And they know, they've got a few benchmarks, because a lot of people use common equipment, and they'll say, great, we know that kit, we know how it works. But they want to ask you specific questions like, how are you going to calculate the alcohol, the ABV? How are you going to accurately calculate the volume that you've produced? Are you putting it in cans, bottles? What are the volumes of those cans and bottles? Are you putting it in growlers? Are you putting it in kegs? Are you using 20-litre kegs or 50-litre kegs? Because the answers to all of those questions calculate how much tax you're going to have to pay. That's why they want to talk to the brewer and not talk to us, because they want to be satisfied that you have an understanding that there are different excise rates for full strength or high strength alcohol as there are for light and mid strength beer, things like that. They are the things that they want to make sure you have an understanding of. So they want you to apply yourself, follow the link. It's not that hard. Everyone in the industry before you has done it. And the reason you should have some level of confidence that you can do it yourself is that what you're actually doing is applying to the government for a license to pay tax. So of course the government's going to give that to you, aren't they? So that's that one in a nutshell. That's the Commonwealth one. And that license is the license that actually authorizes you to make beer and within Australia. That's the production approval, essentially, because you're making an excisable good. We then step down into the state government requirements, and they differ in every state and territory in Australia. The most common, and it's almost universal, but it's with some differences, are what we call producer wholesaler licenses. And it's an accurate name. You can be either a producer or a wholesaler, or you can be both. If you just make enough beer to be a small little local tap house where you only make enough beer that the locals drink it and take it home, and you don't grow beyond that, then you never really become a wholesaler, and that's okay. But as you grow and you grow and you grow, different rules apply to the wholesaler and the producer wholesaler elements of these liquor licenses. To use the Queensland model, we've identified over 40 or 50 of these applications now in the last 2 or 3 or 4 years in Queensland, as we've seen great growth in this sector. That there's basically 3 models. There's a producer wholesaler where you only sell your own beer and that's all you want to do. You just get a producer wholesaler license and you can sell that beer to people to take away from the brewery, to drink at the brewery. You can put it in growlers, you can put it in cans, you can put it in pints and schooners, and people can drink it at the bar. That's the most common license. We then have another license, another model where if you want to sell someone else's beer, guest taps, or you think that the market wants some wine for the ladies, that really stereotypical answer that actually isn't true, because beer is a girl's drink. Just ask Young Henry's. They've got a great mural on the wall. If you follow that stereotype and you think that you need wine, or you need something that you don't make, or you think that you've got a functions room in your venue and people will want spirits for Christmas parties or weddings, then you might need a second license. So we have a producer wholesaler plus, where you apply for a second license, and that might be a cafe, a restaurant, a function room, or a small bar. Or you might use in Queensland a satellite cellar door from a Queensland winery. There are those models where you're essentially getting 2 different licenses and blending the authorities of the 2 licenses to meet the end state. And it's hard. You basically have one building and half of it's your producer wholesaler license, and the other half, where the public are, is a cafe or a bar. And those examples are Revel Brewing and your Semi-Pro that just got bought by Black Hops. Those venues have a 2 license model. Brouhaha on the sunny coast. There's lots of those examples around. Moffat Beach is another one. So they can be larger or smaller, but they have 2 liquor licenses within this one building.
Yep.
And then if you want to sell, one of the problems with that model is restaurant licenses can't sell takeaway alcohol. So your producer wholesaler can sell your beer, but if you've got a guest tap of a unique beer that you happen to get some of Currumbin's great bubblegum grape sour, which is just a cracker of a beer, you get a keg of that, and someone wants a growler of that to take away from your bar, you can't sell that takeaway at the moment under Queensland licensing laws. and it confuses customers. So you mean I can buy a growler of your stuff, but not of the other, off one tap, but not off another. And that's complicated. So then people move into the third model, which is a full scale commercial hotel license. And a commercial hotel license can sell the beer you make there, the beer anyone makes anywhere, including wine and spirits and all of that. Just like any country, like any normal pub. A hotel license in Queensland gives you everything. It's the gold standard. We've had licensees in Queensland choose every one of those options, and all of their situations are unique. So you need to sit down and really think about what you want to do and what the flow on effect of those decisions are, because you have to essentially do a cost benefit analysis, because a commercial hotel license, you're not going to get much change out of $50,000. Whereas for just a simple producer wholesaler license, you're looking more like $5,000, $5,000 to $5,500. And if you pick the site correctly, you're not going to have some of the flow-on costs that happen when you choose a hotel. Within some of the other states, there are packaged liquor licenses and drink on premises authorizations and things like that you need to apply for. The licensing process, my advice, and it's not just self-serving, it's born from watching lots of people do it themselves and picking up the mess after they've spent twice as long as someone like me could have done it and still not got their licenses. Engage someone who's done it before and who knows what they're doing. No consultant. We live in a fairly transparent government world. None of us get favors out of government. We don't hand over brown paper bags to get favors. Those types of things. We just know the system and know how to move all of the chess pieces towards the end of the game as quickly as possible. So engaging a consultant will help you speed that up. And if you get open 1 week or 2 weeks or 1 month or 2 months earlier, the additional sales that you make every single week will pay for itself in spades in the overall.
Yeah, good point.
So really consider doing what you do well and letting others do what they do well. Every week you're open earlier, I aim to get people provisional licenses wherever I can, so that they know before they even start digging up the concrete to put drainage trenches in and stuff like that the liquor license is sitting there ready for them once they build it. If you build it, they will come kind of concept. So it's a security blanket to get a provisional license before you start work. Doesn't always happen. I've been on plenty of sites, including one I've got a financial stake in. I'm a small investor in a new brewery that opened in Queensland called Easy Times. We opened 4 hours before the first bounce on the AFL preliminary final. Yeah. We're immediately opposite Gate 1 and Gate 2 at the Gabba. So we opened 4 hours before the bounce. And we weren't ready yet. We're still not ready with the brew house. We've opened as a brew pub first. But we had got provisional approval for our hotel license in about May. And we just had to send a series of photos and get last minute inspections done. But we didn't get our license until 4:41 p.m. Friday afternoon. It's our final actual approved license. So they're the examples you will see. And that was me moving every chess piece I knew possible to get us open early, even though the brewery wasn't ready yet, because we had to cater to that major game. And there are versions of this wherever you are. If you're in a rural country town in Queensland, Victoria, there are local festivals, there are tourism seasons and all of those things where school holidays. You'll know that Sunny Coast breweries, we're rapidly trying to get a couple wrapped up at the moment so that they're ready for the whole December Christmas holiday period, hopefully when the Queensland borders open. Getting ready in time for those surges is worth it every time. The process for liquor licenses will be dependent on your site, heavily dependent on your site. There's a bunch of paperwork. You might have to do community impact statements. You might have to advertise the application to the public. Police and council will be consulted. and each state has various forms where you have to pay councillor fee or pay other government departments fees for them to comment on your liquor license application. And the sooner you line all of those ducks up and get them moving in the same direction, the quicker your license will be granted. But they become hidden costs. There's a $650 fee in Brisbane for a council to comment on a liquor license application, for example. So if you're not aware of it, you can blow your budget out. And when you're a small business, you know, that $650 can be a critical thing. I try and, my quotes itemize all of that stuff so you can see it and make a fairly informed decision what your costs are going to be. But sitting down with an expert and working out whether you need an on-premises authorization or whether you're going to sell packaged liquor or just produce your own beer, all of those things are part of doing your research early. My advice is to go and talk to other brewers in your industry, in your locality, in your state and in other states, but particularly ones near you and within your same state, because they've jumped over all of these hurdles before. They've run the race and they're open. We were talking off air about the collaborative nature of the Queensland of the craft beer industry generally. We're an emerging industry with Australia. I mean, the big brewers have been around since day one, but the scale and growth of the craft sector is fairly phenomenal, and a real pat on the back for so many people who have driven it over the last decade plus to get to where it is now. But they're so collaborative. Our wine industry is equally as old, if not older, and you never see a collaboration wine, but we have hundreds of collaboration beers every year. That should give new entrants to the industry some insight that go to your local brewery. They realize that if there's 2 or 3 or 4 breweries in an area, then that can create a brewery trail, and everyone benefits from people coming as tourists to a region, to a suburb. The Sydney's Inner West is a great example of that. There's a great little trail through Sydney's Inner West that you're generally not walking all that well at the end of it, no matter how responsibly you try and drink. And they all work together and they share information, and everyone is better for having that critical mass there. And they share information because they're burdened by the same set of complex rules. So if they can help you avoid a mistake that they've made, they'll share it with you. I was recently up in on the Sunshine Coast talking to Matty from Moffat Beach, and they started out in a tiny little nano pilot kit scale brewery within a cafe at Moffat Beach. So they had 2 liquor licenses, the producer wholesaler and the cafe, but it's tiny. I'm talking it's about 3 meters wide and about 5 meters long, the whole brewery area. And they're just moving into an industrial scale warehouse now. And they've got a brand new 10-hex system and all of that. And Matty was happy to walk myself, and I know he's walked other brewers through and shown that he's now designed, because he's learnt from his mistakes or the growing pains that you go through, how important it is to design and set up your tanks in a way that you can move a pallet jack between them so that you can empty your mash tin with all the spent grain. All of those things, go and talk to your peers and they will help you. We're at Easy Times now. We've got Jimmy from Milton Common who's come over and helped our brewer Curran put together the brew kit, because they've got they've gone through that process, and we haven't got the staff from China who would normally come and help build it at the moment. That's how collaborative it is. We've got a brewer that's only 2K from our brewery, happily willing to come over and spend 10 plus hours helping our brewer put a brewery together. Reach out for that help. It really is an amazing industry, the craft beer industry. So And that applies. They'll tell you who their liquor licensing consultant was, and they'll tell you who their other consultants were. So that moves us into the third step, I guess. The third step is local government. And local government generally looks after two main things that are relevant here. And there's a couple of small little relevant ones. But local government looks after food licensing, and we're making a food product. So you're going to need to talk to your environmental health officers in council and get a food license, because we've got to have systems in place. We have grain, so we need storage for grain so we're not attracting rats and cockroaches and all of those things. And they're things we need to manage. The other thing that council manage or local government manages is town planning laws. I mapped out at a state level, you might apply for one or two or three, or one or two different liquor licenses or a full commercial hotel license. All of the decisions that you make there flow down into town planning. If you want to apply for a commercial hotel license, you are going to need town planning as a hotel. Now, that is expensive real estate, and it's an expensive town planning process. So if you want to go that way and be a full hotel, understand that that is the more expensive end of the scale, and you're going to need investment backing to do that generally. Most of as you look at the more small scale ones, they're in industrial estates and they're just selling their own beer. And that flows generally from a town planning element. So site is critical. You've got to find a site that does all of the things that you want to put in your business. And it's easier said than done. If you look in really generic, simplified town planning terms, and I'm not a town planner, I've just had to learn a lot about town planning. In country towns and in our cities and suburbs, town planners identify an area where they put all of the industrial use, where all the mechanics and the panel beaters and the factories are. And they isolate them, and there's no residents there. And generally, if you're at an industrial estate at about 7 o'clock in the morning, every car park is full because all the tradies are there, and there's utes and trucks and semis, and it's full. They put them there together at one kind of historical level, because police can then at nighttime, because that traffic example, if you go through at 4 o'clock in the afternoon through an industrial estate, wide open streets with barely a car in sight, because everyone's done their day's work and gone home, and the panel beater's closed and the factory's closed, and it's generally an almost deserted precinct. So they put them all together, and at a planning level, you can put a factory, and breweries are generally considered, within Queensland, the term is medium impact industry, but you're considered essentially a factory. So they put all the factories together, and those areas are closed by 4 or 5 or 6. And if the police drive through at 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 o'clock at night and see a bunch of 20, 18, 19, 20-year-old kids wandering around drunk, the police will pull over and have a chat to them, because they kind of shouldn't be there, and they're probably up to no good. So that's how town planners think. They put these uses together in the one spot. And that's why generally you never see restaurants and bars in industrial estates. So town planning puts assessment tables, and they say, in this area, in this suburb or this estate, your use as a factory is self-assessable. It's just accepted. You can just do it. So if you are leasing a tenancy that used to be a paint factory, you can generally put a brewery there with no further approval, and your liquor license application might cost you about $5,000 and take 4 to 6 weeks, and you're done. That's the dream run if you're only making your own beer. But if you then decide that you want to add other people's beer and other wine and stuff like that, you might then need town planning approval for a bar or a cafe, and they're not generally allowed in those industrial estates. So you end up with this code accessible application to council via a town planner, and that can add $10,000, $15,000 to your costs straight up, and 3, 4, 5, 6 months sometimes. And the other side of it is wherever you can put cafes and bars as an accepted development. So, in big shopping centers, in center activity zones, in mixed use zones, things like that, commercial zones. When you get into our CBDs, it's the other way around. You're allowed to have bars here. You're allowed to have cafes here. Town planning supports those uses in the middle of our CBD, but you can't put a factory there. So if you want both of these things, you might not be able to have them. And it's a really difficult jigsaw puzzle to put together, and getting advice early. Sometimes you will accept less than you initially wanted to have in your business because the other things become time and cost prohibitive. But that's what we've learned over over a decade now in watching these town planning applications. And some of the examples are just crazy. The legends from Black Ops, there when they moved from Eddie's garage into what's now known as Black Ops 1 in Burleigh Heads. Their original town planning application fully allowed the production component, but the tap room, and it's a relatively small tap room in the overall scheme of things, had a condition endorsed on their development application that they could only have 4 seats. 4 seats.
Wow.
Didn't actually say how many people could be there, but they could only have physical 4 spots where you could sit down. And they had to accept that to get the doors open and get some trade happening and then move forward. And that's been amended, and they've now got Black Ops 2 and Black Ops 3 and a Black Ops 4 on the way with a different brand. So all of these hurdles are worth it. And I hope having an understanding of all of those little bits of the jigsaw puzzle will help people a little bit.
Yeah, there's a lot to consider, isn't there?
Yeah, and it does. I just met with Archer Brewing up here in Brisbane, and Stewie has kicked more tires on more sites than probably any of my clients over the last 5 or 6 years, and they've finally found a great new site. I'm so excited for them. But that was the challenge. They could never find a site on all of the commercial real estate.coms and that of the world that had the right mix of uses for them and justified them spending the money on a town planning application. Watch this space. It's an exciting new venue coming there. And there's lots of those stories. Some of them, Revel Brewing in Bulimba in Brisbane. The limit for medium impact industry in Queensland is 200,000 litres of production per year. Now, if you do something like distillation, if you're a distillery, 200,000 litres is a hell of a lot of distilled spirit, a very large quantity in the overall scheme of things. But a keg of beer is like 80, 90% water. So we're being measured against all of that volume that's mostly water because of the other products that broad definition brings in. So there's a lot of lobbying work going on at the moment between myself, the IBA, their equivalents in Australian distilling, and the Queensland government. And I know there's versions of this happening in each state. Queensland's got a craft beer strategy that's been progressing now for a couple of years. I wrote a memo 9 years ago now asking for craft beer permits. We still don't have them. The wheels of government certainly turn very slowly, but we're getting there, and there's a bill that will be reintroduced within the next couple of months by the newly re-elected Palaszczuk government here in Queensland, who have been driving a craft beer strategy for a couple of years now. We thought we'd potentially lost that if they lost the election. So at one level, it's great to see the Palaszczuk government re-elected here in Queensland so that this craft beer strategy bill can get back before the Parliament quickly and get voted on. It's not what the IBA and myself and others have set about to achieve. It's maybe 60% of what we asked for. As I talk about the IBA and other peak industry bodies, I strongly advocate for anyone in this industry as a startup, join the IBA. They are your peak industry body. join them, and they will share information and know that, in small business, membership for organisations like this is just another bill. That's some other thing you've got to pay. But when they're out there lobbying for a permit that will allow Queensland breweries to go to farmers markets and go to events and sell their beer, to sell other people's craft beer, artisan spirits and Queensland wines, that will make, the rising tide will float all of our boats. And it only happens because, whether you see it or not, those peak industry bodies are working in the background behind with government and trying to, behind the scenes, make things happen.
Right. Now, you may have touched on it in the earlier part of the segment about all the different licensing requirements, but speaking to a number of small breweries in Sydney's inner west and also in my local area in Penrith, a lot of them have said that when they started out, they got into trouble unintentionally, obviously not knowing, maybe not doing enough research into it all, but so getting in trouble for not complying to certain licensing and compliance requirements, such as, the trading hours, because I know that can vary. There's all these different, I guess, approvals and licensing for consumption on site, what those hours look like for a brewery. Then there's the retail takeaway sales hours, and then there's also an extended hours license as well. So you can kick on till 2 a.m. or whatever, depending on the state. But and then I also know there's patron limitations. You talked earlier there about the 4 seats there at Black Hops, but and drink serving limitations. I know there's been some good lobbying efforts, especially in Sydney's inner west, about they used to only be able to do 100 ml tastings at one point in time. Any comments you can give us a bit around those sort of things? Because they all sound like additional approvals and licenses you need to get to those main ones you mentioned in the beginning. Is that right?
Yeah, and it is, and it's so common, and it goes back to that advice to seek out as much information as you can and employ people who've done this before to do it, because we avoid those things wherever we can. You don't win every battle. Any liquor license application must be accompanied by evidence of the town planning approval. So if your town planning approval gets a condition saying you can only operate between 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. because you only told them that you're a factory, then that will become the hours of your liquor license. So you need to tell them at a planning level that you're also going to have a tap room and what the hours of the tap room mean, because the jigsaw puzzle goes together. And if you don't tell the government agencies the right thing, you'll end up with restrictions. And I watch people, like, a common mistake. I look through liquor licenses where people have done it themselves, and I see that their trading hours are like Thursday, Friday, Saturday only, Thursday to Sunday, 4 p.m. to 10 p.m. or something like that. They've told the government they're the only hours that I am going to trade. And then all of a sudden you have a public holiday Monday. Now, it's okay in your normal trading hours to think, Monday and Tuesday is when we're going to operate as a factory and we don't want customers there while we're brewing the beer. But if a public holiday falls on a Monday, it's like a weekend, isn't it? And you need to be open. So always make sure that you ask for ordinary trading hours, maximum trading hours that can apply for you, maximum seating, all of those things. Try not to accept a condition that restrains you unless you're absolutely bent over the barrel. If it's the difference between getting open and fighting that battle later, get open and lodge a replicharge round to vary your liquor license. Get the bird in the hand. But they are very common. When I last did the Inner West craft beer trail in Sydney, the very first time I did it, not the last time I did it, with my lens of licensing rules, was very surprised to see, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, breweries with a security, small breweries, like really comparably small to micro businesses, having to pay a licensed crowd controller to be there at 3 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon. it wasn't because there was any patron behavior issue. It was just those rules that start happening saying if you're controlling entry to a venue, you must be a licensed crowd controller. So you can't just put your own staff member out there to do, checks and balances, ID checking and stuff like that. But they were primarily standing there with a pace counter, counting everybody in and out of the venue. Now, that's a $50 an hour staff member at 3 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon in a brewery that might have 50 people in it. It's a fairly significant cost. And, the IBA and others are, working on those things as part of, and I don't have a lot of detail about it, but I know there's an Inner West trial and things that are looking at addressing these issues, because as a small business, they cost you. You got to pay those staff. In Queensland, you can't sell takeaway liquor after 10 p.m. So, you've got to, you have this compliance risk where you get a new brewery, the brewery can trade. I can drink in the bar until midnight, but I can only sell takeaways until 10. And that has a real flow-on effect, because if I'm sitting there having a good night, I've tried 7 or 8 of your specialty beers, and I've decided I want 3 growlers to take home, 3 squealers, whatever the mix is that I want to take home of the beers that I've enjoyed. And this rule says I can't have takeaways after 10 o'clock. I leave, and whereas I might otherwise have put them in the fridge and settled in for a session for a couple of more hours.
Yeah,
that's money that doesn't go in the till. So look at all of those conditions. One of the drafts of the Queensland craft beer strategy that we saw in consultation included things like you mentioned, 100 milliliter samples and 10 milliliter samples of spirits. That was all they were going to allow these businesses to sell under one draft. And the IBA and myself did some more lobbying, and we tried to point out the real practical, rational responses to that, in that you can't buy 100 ml beer glass. They don't exist. They're not in the market. And tell me where I buy a 10 ml nit pourer that complies with the Commonwealth weights and measures law that says we must only sell spirits in 15s and 30s. So all these silly details, sometimes you have to point out the ridiculousness of some of the red tape that government throw out there. The rules for the sake of rules. It's Monty Python-esque, the ministry of silly rules instead of silly walks. So the way around that is employing people who know what they're doing. And if you want to do it yourself, still reach out to those people to get some specific advice, and reach out to your peers within the industry, because we're a very collaborative group, and we'll help you wherever we can.
Already, I know that a lot of people listening, finance is going to be an issue, getting a brewery up and running. And I guess people are going to try and make shortcuts wherever they can, whether it's with getting cheaper equipment from overseas, or, trying to do everything themselves, and, rather than employing specialists, to do it for them. But I'm already formulating in my mind that with the amount of red tape and hoops that you have to jump through from all 3 levels of government, I think just paying some money or budgeting some money to talking to people like you or town planners to just help you guide through that process just seems like money well spent, and it will probably pay off in the long run. Like you're saying, it might mean that you can get open a few weeks earlier or a couple of months earlier, and that's more time to, I guess, earn that money back in your sales of being open earlier. So I just think it's probably an area that if no one knows what they're doing or very new to it, they should definitely consider just forking out the money to, if it's within their budget to do so.
Yeah, and they are the conditions I really try and oppose strongly as well. And you're not always successful, but they are the ones, having run businesses myself and run bars myself, I know that there are recurrent costs with those things. If you accepted a condition for 100 ml sample on your license, you're going to have to source some unique unique glassware that complies with Australian standards and has all of the weights and measures stamps on it. You have to source that quite unique product, and because it's unique, it's going to cost you. But security, security guards and all of that type of stuff, it all costs. And one of the analogies that I use, and I've just kind of looked through the show notes and realized I jumped over RSA. Almost universally across Australia now, everyone has to have an RSA certificate. But within each state, we have managers' licenses and RMLV, responsible management of licensed venues training, things like that. I liken it, and the analogy I use is getting the liquor license is like registering a semi-trailer, like a big road train. Running a little cafe is risky, but running a cafe with liquor has more risk to it. And that's a risk management kind of approach. And making and selling beer within some sectors of the community is considered a higher risk activity. So you have to get an approval to do that, and that's your liquor license. That authorizes you to sell the liquor. So I said earlier at the federal level, they authorize you to produce it with an excise license. The state authorizes sale and supply. So that's what your state license authorizes you to do. So getting a liquor license is like getting registration papers and on road for your truck. You've got to meet all of the safety standards and all of the paperwork and get the truck on the road. Then in each state, there's often a manager's license that goes with it. And that's actually issued to a person. And think of that like the truck driver's license. I'm A1 trucking, but if I'm asking Chris to drive the truck for me, Chris needs his own truck driver's license. And the training component of it, in Queensland, it's called RMLV. That training component is just going to truck driving school. Once I've been to truck driving school, if I don't also got a shiny certificate with a star on it, doesn't mean I can drive the truck yet. I've still got to go to government and get my own license to be a licensed driver of this high risk vehicle that is a liquor license. And I started this analogy with RSA. Every one of our staff members can serve alcohol to our customers. And RSA in this analogy is like a learner's permit. Anyone who's driving at any level, including just serving beer, they need their learner's permit, 100% of them. And that helps us set these standards. So one of the things I do in policy development, when we look at risk assessed management plans and stuff for liquor licenses, these are the learnings you'll get from using experts. There are headings in these risk assessed management plans that sort of talk about responsible service of alcohol and what policies and procedures you have in place. What I say in my ramps is the minimum obligation, because I see people put stuff in there that says, we don't serve doubles, or we don't serve shots, or all of these things. But if a businessman comes in and orders $100 a nip whiskey for in a shirt and tie, and they're stone cold sober and they're just having a celebration for a contract, if you are so prescriptive in your management plan that you say we don't serve neat spirits or straight spirits, you'll lose $100 sale from a person who you can legally serve to. So this is why we have nationally accredited training for RSA, because we should trust that our staff have been given training by nationally accredited trainers that gives them that background. And then we do on-the-job training, and we can set some house policies, but don't put it in a document that the government approves, or you're binding yourself. It might end up as a condition of your license that you can't do it. RSA, just to avoid any future confusion, every state and territory in Australia has some weird and wonderful version of this. There's a photo ID in New South Wales that you need. There's the nationally accredited certificate in Australia, and there's a different course in Victoria that must be done face-to-face by approved trainers in Victoria. And that's just the 3 eastern seaboards. I've done more. Yeah, I've done more RSA training courses than I can count. Having already been a principal investigator for a liquor licensing regulator, I've still had to go and do those courses and do refresher training on them. So there's kind of no way around that. Within Queensland, you can wait for 30 days until your staff get their RSA. I advise my clients to hire them with it, or if they were someone you were going to hire anyway, hire them and give them 7 days to do it so you don't forget. You're on this week's roster, but you're not on next week's. Just little tips like that are things that experienced consultants in any area. Your town planner will tell you to choose one option over another of 2 sites that you're looking at. They've just got the experience to help guide you through. Site selection is absolutely critical, and finding a space where you can have a production facility and a tap room and it might be a shop. It might also be seen as a restaurant or a food and beverage outlet. Under the Queensland Craft Beer Strategy, we clearly have asked the government to give us 1 liquor license and 1 use at a town planning level. Because in town planning, they view us as medium impact or special industry if you make more than 200,000 litres. They view us as a shop when we sell our retail. They view us as a bar when we just have drink in. They view us as a food and beverage outlet, a cafe or a restaurant. And sometimes they view you as a hotel. You might need to list 2 or 3 or 4 uses on your town planning application. And the highest risk use then becomes what you have to do. So that's when you see those big development applications that we call impact accessible in Queensland, where you have to stick the sign out the front and advertise for town planning. And until you get that, you can't get your liquor license approved. And police and council and OLGR all talk to each other before the approval comes together. Every agency contributes to that jigsaw puzzle being approved.
And you briefly touched on earlier in the conversation about, because all breweries now are starting to offer some sort of food offering. Even some are bringing in food trucks as well. You know, I know personally I'd like to have some sort of food offering at my brewery, whether that's a kitchen or whether that's just bringing in a food truck on the weekends and rotating them. But I'd also like to have live music. You know, I'd like to create an atmosphere where people can come and see, someone with an acoustic in the corner and playing some favorite, tunes. Is there any sort of considerations that an aspiring brewery owner needs to consider for those sort of uses or those sort of perks?
Yeah, and again, every site is quite specific. If you're putting a brewery in a residential suburb, it does get harder to have entertainment there. If you're going to have it in an industrial suburb, there's really no one around there who's going to care about a bit of noise. So they're the hidden costs. You can talk to a town planner, for example, about a particular site, and they'll tell you this site with the things you want to do will become impact accessible, and you're going to need a traffic survey. You're going to need somebody telling you exactly how many car parking spaces you must have. You're going to need an acoustic engineer. Now, a traffic survey might cost you another $5,000, and an acoustic engineer might cost you similar, depending on where you are. And there's a lot of hidden costs associated with this. A lot of breweries don't actually have a food license, and councils haven't kind of caught up. They're starting to catch up because they've realized that, if you bake a commercial cake, they make you get a food license. But these breweries have just kind of opened up and they've treated them a bit like a factory historically, but now they're realizing, no, they do need a food license. So once you get your food license, you either consider, do you put your own pizza oven in and make some pizza? We touched on RSA. Yeah, adding food with the consumption of alcohol is a core responsible service of alcohol concept. We all know that. Drinking on an empty stomach gets you pretty messy, and when you're putting down a double IPA, it can be a pretty short night out.
Pat from Willie the Boatman in one of our very early episodes, he mentioned something that was goes back to the contradiction that a lot of councils or local and state government tend to sort of create. And they were told by local council that they weren't allowed to have a food truck. But then when they went to get their police approval or notice, they were told they had to have it, So, yeah, I guess there's that, rock and a hard place, left hand not talking the right sort of atmosphere you're dealing with when it comes to government regulations.
And it is those, sometimes the food trucks, generally a food truck is licensed to be anywhere, but it's that kind of operating a business. If a super popular food truck pulled up in your suburban cul-de-sac and started cranking out music and had 400 people come on a Saturday afternoon to get some slow cooked ribs or something like that, you'd be pretty upset that they chose your cul-de-sac in quiet suburbia to do it. There are rules around these things where they can and can't be, depending on each local government area, but they're generally accepted within most of those commercial zones that they can be there. But there are rules for the same reason that, imagine you've leased a bricks and mortar restaurant. You're paying thousands of dollars a week, tens of thousands of dollars a week, sometimes on a high street, in Chapel Street in Melbourne or something like that. And you've got a really nice restaurant with a full commercial kitchen operating, and a food truck pulls up in the car park right outside and targets your customers with a similar style of food. You'd be pretty dark about it. So there are control measures around that for valid reasons. But if your brewery wants a food truck there, you consult with your local council, you make sure they've got the right food license for it, and you make sure that you are allowed to have it before you commit to your overall business. Because what happens, and we've seen this happen, unless there is a food offer, people drink less and they leave. And this isn't about serving people until they're drunk, but it is about maximizing the amount of money you make in your business. Once someone has found you and made the effort to come out and find your brewery and try your great beer, you want them to stay as long as possible within the responsible service of alcohol framework. So offering food is a great way of doing that. If you don't want to run that part of your business because you're just good at making beer and you can't cook, then you bring in a food truck, or you sublease the kit. You put a kitchen in and you sublease it. Stone and Wood's Queensland Brewery does that. They've got a kitchen and they just roll different offers through. So they started with a great little bao caterer who makes Chinese baos. Amazing. Stone and Wood makes great beer. They didn't have to make the food, and it's a good concept. Most of this stuff is keep it simple, stupid. It's the KISS principle.
Yep.
If you rewind and you look at old movies from the Prohibition era and stuff like that, all the speakeasies, they had nuts on the bar. Why? The common ingredient of all bar snacks is salt. And you can eat a nice salty bit of pizza, some bar snacks, some slow cooked ribs, and you'll drink more beer. And you'll do it responsibly, because when you've got a chicken wing in your mouth, you haven't got your beer in your mouth, so you're slowing down your rate of consumption. These are some pretty common, simple principles that if you don't deliver on them, you decide you don't want to run food, so you don't put a food offering in, someone comes in, they have a hazy, they have an IPA, a double IPA, and they have a stout, and then all of a sudden their legs aren't working all that well, and they leave, and they've only spent X amount of money. Where you offer them some water, you get a food offer, those things, and they have the fourth and the fifth drink. You make more money, the food truck makes some money, and you're not having to put some customer in a wrist lock or call the police because they got pissed and got in a fight. They're all pretty simple principles that do come together, but it is a holistic picture, and getting your food right, getting your music right. If you're just at some level, if you're not playing, depending on your market, if you haven't got the hottest 100 on that weekend, you'll miss the market and people will go somewhere else. If you don't have a duo on a Sunday afternoon for a Sunday session, you're going to lose those markets. Make sure, if you want that as part of your business and you see it as essential to succeeding in the overall business. I made this observation in a recent conversation with a colleague. So many craft breweries, owners, they start off with craft beer as their hobby. Once you start moving into this licensing space, it is a business, and you have to run it as a business, and you have to make decisions about the things that you offer that make it a director of a company acting with the best interests of their company would make. So don't cut the corners. Offer food. So live music's one thing. You can't just play live or recorded music in Australia without a license. So we have a regulator called One Music. We used to have two, APRA and PPCA, and you're essentially paying for the copyright of the person who sang the song and copyright of the person who wrote the lyrics of the song. So they've all got rights to their music, and that flows on to TV and stuff like that as well. So all of those rights, you can't just use your personal Spotify account to play music in a commercial environment, and that part of the terms and conditions of things like Spotify. You can't use your personal Fox Sports login to screen and play a Fox Sports game. These are all things that have costs and underpin the rights of all of those. I do a lot of work in the major event and artist space, work with a lot of great live music festivals and live musicians across the country, and they're sublime artists, and we've got such an amazing music industry and performing arts industry in Australia. We need to pay them for their services, and there's a structure around that, and we should all be passionate about it, because if you've got a good duo playing some great tunes in your craft brew pub, you'll make more money. Just make sure you pay them and you pay all of the right regulators. It all adds up, but run it like a business, not a hobby, and get good advice. It'll help everyone.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I reckon if I hadn't spoken to you, I probably would have just been playing me favorite playlist from Spotify when I opened mine. But wow, it's you just don't think what things you need to consider, because I want to create I've got in my mind a certain environment I want to create in my brewery, and that involves good food and good music and good beer. But yeah, it's good to get your sort of advice around some important considerations when it comes to the legal and compliancing side. But we've gone over time, but I'm sure the audience wouldn't care, because there's been some great takeaways from some of our chat so far. But just to sort of finish it off a bit, I'd love to get some of your industry insights just about how the craft beer, the current state of it is, or even the liquor industry in Australia, where you see the craft beer industry, and probably what things can be done to better improve it, either yourself or the IBA or people related in that space that can better lobby to make the craft beer and liquor industry more, I guess, fairer and more accessible to people.
Yeah, look, I've already touched on it. Join the IBA, join those peak industry bodies if you are a hotel or a restaurant, or you're selling into clubs. Advocate for those peak industry bodies. They do a lot for you. I don't think that, there are some people who think craft beer in Australia is sort of reached its threshold, and I think they're so far wrong. It's not
Yeah,
funny.
no, and to be honest, a lot of people on this show have not said that. We're definitely not in the beginning stages, but we've a long way to go, and there's a lot of room for new entrants to enter the market, is what the general consensus is.
Absolutely. And, our governments are looking at that stuff. We're certainly not at the levels that places like Portland are overseas. There's so much more growth. And our governments are responding and introducing craft beer strategies, and they're working with peak industry bodies. There's a lot of red tape we need to get rid of. When a peak industry body reaches out to its members and asks you for information, I know how much time that takes to stop what you're doing and share those stats and share those feedback. But if you don't get involved, the rules won't improve and they won't get better. One of the things I've said, I met with quite a number of ministers of parliament here in Queensland, and including during the COVID period. And I've said that craft beer is proving that we're a return to village. We're like a scene out of the 1980s Highlander, the old Scottish Highland. You take your chook in and you exchange it for a few pints. The farmers make the eggs and the grain, and the brewer makes the beer, and the whole village works together. These little community breweries are so popular within their communities. They're so passionate about it. In communities large and small, like I love just how consistent Bent Spoke have been in the hottest 100 because of the passion of Canberra craft beer drinkers. Canberra's got a really small population, but they're so passionate about their two main craft breweries there, between Capital and Bent Spoke, that they consistently get large numbers of beers in that hottest 100 because of local support. It really is a village ownership kind of thing, and people's palates change. If they come to their local brewery and say, "Oh, geez, your lager's not really my thing, but I love the atmosphere and I can bring my dog and the kids can play in the playground," and all of those really family-friendly things that craft breweries do, that some pubs do, but a lot of pubs don't. They become the big booze machine.
Yeah.
Local councils are identifying that they want these breweries in their area because they create employment. I won't accurately quote the stats, but between 5 and 10% of beer production in Australia from craft breweries, we employ more people than the other 90% of big beer employ. We directly employ more people for that 5 and 10% than big beer employs for the other 90. We're an incredible employer of small business staff members in local communities. We create jobs for the food truck. You create jobs for the whole paddock to plate concept that restaurants have, where I'm watching it go grain to pint. The spent grain goes back to the farm and feeds the pig, and then the pig's coming out as pork spare ribs out of the food truck. And craft beer is doing that, and for that reason, we're not going anywhere. COVID proved that people want to stay within their little catchment area, and support the local small businesses, and that's going to continue. And if you can find a spot that doesn't have a craft brewery, then get one in there and talk to your council, and make it happen. But if they do have one, talk to that owner. They probably welcome you to help create critical mass. Not everyone makes a great sour, but if you make a great sour and I make a great stout, we can have guest taps and we can do those things.
Yep.
It really is a collaborative industry, and I'm certainly, yeah, as a consultant, have been a passionate advocate for 11 years about it now, but just put some skin in the game myself by dipping into easy times. And that advice goes, if you're in Queensland and you want to pop into easy times and I'm there, I'll share this advice with you over one of our over our Gabba Lager or our hazy IPA any day you like.
Excellent. Well, Russell, there's been a lot of information that I reckon is probably the most informative episode we've had today. I mean, especially around an area that is so misunderstood, and it's opened my eyes to a lot of things. I feel like I'm going to have to listen to this episode a good 10, 20 times for it to fully sink in and formulate a bit of a strategy in my mind, and which I know a lot of the listeners will do as well. So, mate, really appreciate you offering your time. And anything you'd like to mention a bit about the business, RSA Liquor Professionals, or any maybe how someone maybe in the Queensland state, because I know that's what you primarily focus on, that can reach you, and how they get in contact?
Oh, look, I'll just leave that down in the show notes. I think if you're in Queensland, you'll find me one way or another. I'd probably wrap it up on this, Chris. Yeah, there's so much detail, and I knew that this would be a fairly lengthy little chat to try and even just provide a snapshot of how many pieces of the jigsaw puzzle are. Get advice and help put the right bits of the jigsaw puzzle together. But when I do training for managers, I always try and wrap it up on this really simple thing. And that is, despite all of the rules we have in our liquor laws and our planning laws and all of that kind of stuff, and we've got RSA and laws around what strength beers we can sell and all of these Department of Silly Rules stuff. I say to managers of venues, the single biggest indicator that you are complying with all of these rules once your doors are open and you're operating is look around the room and look for smiling, happy customers. That's actually what we do. We are the hospitality industry. And if you look around the room and it's full of people with a nice cold beer in their hand and a chicken wing in the other, and surrounded by a bunch of mates, and there's a great independent musician playing in the corner, and you've got all the right permits and approvals for that, you're smacking it out of the park. You're living the dream. Look for smiling, happy customers. And if you see a customer that's not happy, go and find out why. And it might mean that you need to throw the village idiot out because he's annoying them.
Yep.
And then look back around the room and you'll have smiling, happy customers again. It really is a pretty simple process. Like, at the end of the day, we make cold beer, and how good's beer? Look for happy customers.
Yeah, well, very wise words and a nice tie off there for the episode. But thanks again, Russell. Everyone, that was Russell Steele from RSA Liquor Professionals.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Build Me a Brewery podcast. That was part 2 of the licensing and government compliance segment. Part 3 and the final episode of the segment is now live. In this episode, I had the pleasure of being able to chat with Mayor Darcy Byrne from the Inner West Council. So when you get the chance, have a listen as he shares some interesting insights about the craft beer industry from a local government perspective. As always, if you are liking the podcast so far and find the content useful, please give us a follow and rating on whatever platform you're listening on. Also, follow us on all our social media handles, as well as visiting our website, www.buildmeabrewery.com.au, and much more complimentary content will be coming your way very shortly if you sign up to our mailing list. I'm Chris Hayton, your host, and this is the Build Me a Brewery podcast.